As I mentioned before about certain blocks needing add and edit templates, in older versions of concrete5, every block needed both an add and an edit template. But in 5.5, we actually got rid of that requirement because we thought it was overdue. But also, we added some what we call some core blocks that are only available in the dashboard, and they don't really have. We wanted them to be placeable through the user interface, but they didn't really have any options. So, for example, if you head to the customize section of your dashboard and you edit this actually lets you control how your dashboard looks to you every time you come in here. And this is way outside the scope of what we're talking about today, but as you can see, there are these blocks called dashboard featured add-on and dashboard featured theme. If I click on these, I don't have an edit link. That's because these blocks don't have add.php or edit.php. They're simply bits of functionality that we wanted to be able to place. So their parameters are unimportant, but we did want to give people a way to customize where they lived, if they showed up on a page or if not. So they can be deleted and they can be added. So if I come in here and I see dashboard featured theme, since this has no edit template, if I click on it, it just shows up in the page. There's no interstitial add or edit. So it is now possible to create blocks that have a really, it's easier now than ever to create blocks that are, they're reusable bits of functionality that don't have any user options. If you've looked at anything in the marketplace up till now, there are some types of blocks that when you click to add them, you'll get an interstitial pop-up that says this block has no options. Just click add to edit. That was really, it was always possible to create these things, but the editing experience for it was not that compelling. So in 5.5 we got rid of the requirement that add and edit always be present for blocks. We've got a couple questions that I usually save for the advanced development, but since we've been going through this pretty quickly, there's no harm in touching on some of this stuff. Tommy L asks, I'd be curious to go over a block with more than one table. Yeah, we can do this. I will, I think, what's a good example of one that's not too over the top? How about that guestbook block that we talked about before? I think that's a good example of one. I may come to regret that, but I will use it. So here's an example of a block that has more than one table. So the guestbook block here, when you add it to a page, is this entire bit of content from here to here. It's got feedback. You add a name, an email, a comment, etc. And when I go through to guestbook, you can see that if I come into db.xml, my first table here is called BT Guestbook. And if I go into controller.php, you can see my BT table here is BT Guestbook. So for blocks that use more than one database table, you still have a primary table. And this table still has to have a BID parameter in it. And it is used to sort of mark the block that has been added to the page. You can use other auxiliary tables in this, but you need that primary table. And that's what this does. That's what this is. And so you can see here that this BT guestbook table is from here to here. it has a BID here, and it has all the fields that are kind of required for administering the guestbook block. So when I click edit here and I edit my guestbook block, I have these sort of presentation options, like, are comments enabled for this guestbook instance? Do they require an approval? You know, that kind of stuff. So do they require approval? That's the kind of administrative stuff. And then when you actually submit to that block the BT guestbook entries, that's actually used to store the guestbook entries against that particular block. The guestbook block is a good example of how that that type of multiple block or multiple database table block works. And I would encourage you to kind of look into that one if you want to get a little bit more advanced than this, and we can delve into it a little bit more deeply. In the advanced class. I'm going to head back a little bit to got a number of other questions via the chat. I'm going to scale back just a little bit to kind of brush up again on Carol asks about some of the using custom templates and how you might do that, why you might want to do that, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. So let's step back here and let's a good example here. I'm going to clean up some of this page. So we'll step back and talk a little bit about how we might implement a custom template on one of our sites for let's use the page list block as an example. That's one that people like to customize a fair amount. Let's say you're adding a page list to a page, and you have it here. Here are all the pages on your site, and you didn't like how this looked, and I can't imagine why you might not like that, but you didn't like how this looked, and you wanted to give it a custom template, and none of the ones that were happening here fit what you were doing. Here's how you might start doing that. What you typically do first is you would take view.php from within your blocks class, and you would open up the empty blocks directory here, and you would create a folder with the same handle for the same name for your directory as the directory is in the core blocks directory. You create a templates directory in here, and you'd paste your view.php here, and you'd name it something. So this is, sort of custom templates 101. The only difference between what we talked about before is I'm doing this in the overrides directory, which you should always do if you're working on your own site. I'm naming it beautiful.php, and I'm going to apply my beautiful custom template. Of course, it hasn't done anything because I haven't done anything new. Now I'm going to start making some changes to it. This is some basic stuff here. But actually, let's show how some of the CSS might work in a practical environment. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm going to remove my custom template, and I am going to do what Tom brought up earlier. I'm going to create a custom CSS file for this custom template that I'm going to be using. I'm going to name this folder Beautiful and move my files in there again. And now I'm going to reapply my custom template. Again, no changes take place, but that won't be the case for long. So now you go through your custom template and you can see all of the different classes that are available. And let's say I don't ever want my description to show up here. I can just delete that particular portion, and it's only going to affect this beautiful custom template. There's a class for my H3 called CCM page list title. If I go into view.css and call this, I can give it some custom CSS, and maybe that's not working. It's also possible that some of these source, there we go, is a bit greedy. So now there we go. That's easier to see. So now you can actually see that my my page list has a nice little border on it. It's got smaller stuff here, but I still have a block, and I can still move it around the page. If I add, let's turn that off. It's annoying. If I add a new page list here, it's still going to be. Oh, this is an excellent example of how something to watch out for when you're working with custom templates. Since my beautiful page template has all these important styles on it, any other block added to a page is going to inherit those, even though it's not really using that custom template. So something to watch out for. We're going to call this div class CCM page list, and we can add another class to it called CCM beautiful page list. And then in here, we can prepend CCM beautiful page list to our H3. And so now this beautiful page list over here looks beautiful appropriately, and this one still looks the same. And it has a description because we haven't yet removed that description, etc. And you can, anything that you do in this template, is very custom work. So you could you could add in the one of the icons that we have in concrete5 here. And so now you've got yourself, I'm going to delete that, it's annoying. So now you're actually using a nice icon in your custom template as opposed to just a list of pages. And anywhere that you actually apply this, you're getting a nice list of pages. But if you can edit it and still display pagination if you were so inclined. And the beautiful template still works with as many of the different options that the page list template supports, as long as you don't remove those portions of it. So that's a good example of taking a custom template and or taking a view layer and turning it into a custom template. Similarly, let's take a look at how the page list uses tools to affect RSS. So the page list gives a tool here. And it helpfully shows this little icon here. Well, that's not very beautiful. So if we go into our beautiful template here, we can see that this portion of the view template controls the RSS functionality here. And having just this little icon here seems a little strange. So what I might do in my beautiful template is I might move it up to the top. And then I might say CCM page list RSS icon. That's not very helpful. I'm going to call this download RSS feed. And then I'm going to take this CCM beautiful page list, and I'm going to float it to the right and give it a little margin. And so now you can see that maybe I'll make it a little smaller too. That's not helpful. Probably because it's okay. Probably because it's floating. Well, at any rate, you can see that I've now moved the RSS feed that shows up in this that shows up for this guy over to the right-hand side, which looks a lot better than just the weird little icon that's sitting out in the middle of nowhere. If I click on this, I don't actually have an RSS reader on this machine, so it's not going to really it's not going to open up in an RSS reader, but RSS is just XML, and so we can see how it works. If you click on this, you can see that we are using a tool here, and we are going, it's tools blocks page list /RSS. All this is RSS.php that shows up here. And if I look in here, we are just using some core concrete5 methods to get the current block object and get a controller for it, and then run this function called getRSSURL. And this goes through, this is a little bit more advanced than some of the tools examples that are out there, but I think it underscores the point that tools are really, they are just simple scripts that run without any kind of Chrome, and you can write your own functionality into them, but it lets them be bundled into the blocks that work with them, which is nicer than polluting the core with a whole bunch of information about you don't have to write, you don't have to have an RSS block script in the tools directory in the core. You can keep them in the keep them sort of bound up to the tool that that they actually deal with. Does anyone else have any questions? Tom asks, how might I make a block that will allow a non-admin user input to be saved through the form on the front-end view? Could you just handle post data in the view .php? You know, this is a little out of scope for this class, but it's a good question. What you can't, to answer your first question in there, could you just handle post data in view.php? You totally could. What I would recommend doing is, as you've seen in different controllers today, there is a view function up here that you can optionally define in a controller. When you could put the you could handle the post processing in that function, and that way you wouldn't have to actually sort of pollute the view, the actual view template that you showed in the page, or in the view layer, I should say. There are better ways of doing that we can talk about in the advanced development course, where you can actually you know, create forms that submit to particular actions and define those actions in your controller, and then, you know, have a real good separation between code and content that way. But, you know, in a pinch, handling the post directly in the view function here, I think would totally work. Well, let's see. Let's take a little look at some of the other blocks that we have here. You know, when we use the Google Maps block in concrete5, it's pretty. This is a pretty basic block in terms of what we're asking for. We ask for a map title, a location like a street, and then a zoom level. This block is interesting because when that is saved, you can see this is a good example of us using a custom save function that we hook into in order to do some pre-processing of the data before it gets into concrete5. So the first bit that we do is we just make sure that these fields aren't empty, and that's just the kind of same stuff that we had before. And then finally, with zoom, we actually test to make sure that you're not giving a zoom value that is too high or too low. So that's a little bit of sort of validation. It's not really validation in that we don't tell you whether you're doing something wrong, but we do ensure that the data goes in properly. But finally, the coolest part of this function is with your location parameter, we are actually also storing two parameters behind the scenes, so latitude and longitude. And these are defined in db.xml as just float numeric types. And there is a protected private function in this block called Lookup LatLong, which takes a text location and turns it into latitude and longitude. And it does that simply by querying Google Maps API directly. So this isn't code that you would know off the top of your head. This is code that, you know, we know because we've read the Google Maps documentation, and it sends a location to Google Maps, and they geocode it and send the object back to us. And that implementation of that isn't that interesting, but the fact that every time you add or edit the block, we take the data you've provided to us, and in the save function, we do extra work to retrieve a couple different parameters, which we then can use. In the Google Maps block on the page. So if this is our address. So here's the Google Maps block that's been added to the page. You might want to know, here's another interesting, this is something that will actually be useful for your own blocks. In this example, the Google Maps block, we may or may not have our own Vue.js or JavaScript and Vue style sheets, but we do need to add in some Google JavaScript, because obviously Google is hosting the JavaScript that makes this map work. So how do we include in the header the JavaScript that this needs to work? Because if you look in the source of the page, you can see that, where is it? Where is it in the source? Is it in the footer of the page? No? Here it is. How do we know to include HTTP maps.google.com and then this Google Maps API call? Well, that is a special function that you can also include in your controller. There is a function called OnPageView, which if you add something to this, this function automatically gets run early in the page rendering process, letting your block do stuff to the page before the page has actually started to work. So here, what we do is we create an instance of the HTML helper, and this is just a concrete5 helper that makes it so that you can actually, there's no reason for us to even include this in here. Although it was a interesting fragment of code. We can talk about that at another time because it's totally pointless in this context. What you can see this OnPageView doing is we call a function called AddHeaderItem. So this function, AddHeaderItem, AddFooterItem, this is a way to inject stuff, HTML, into the header, meaning the head tag of your theme, and the footer, meaning right before the body tag of your current page. You can add HTML there. And so what we're doing is we are saying, look, into the header of this page, I want to add in this Google Maps JavaScript. And AddHeaderItem takes care of ensuring that the same header items aren't added multiple times, and just making sure that everything is it's added at the proper spot. And so this OnPageView, there's an interesting reason why we do this and not View. So here you can see that there is a View function that's being defined and stuff's being passed in there. A lot of this stuff is actually redundant because it happens automatically. But then there's OnPageView right in front of it, and that's because View, the function, runs right before showing that block in the page. So if you need to take some data you need to get some data and pass it into the View layer, you want to use View. That function renders right before the View HTML or the View template file is processed. OnPageView runs much earlier. It actually, what we do behind the scenes when we're rendering a concrete5 page is we grab all the blocks in the current version, we loop through them, and if there's an OnPageView function, we fire that function. And we do this before the page even starts rendering. And that's what lets us use AddHeaderItem, because we are running it early enough so that we don't the header hasn't formed yet, and we can inject stuff into it. But by the time we get down to here for a view block, we've actually already started processing the page. So if you move this from here into here, it wouldn't work anymore because the header is already formed at that point. So that's the difference between OnPageView and View, and why you might want to use one and not the other.